My name is Virginia Cruz, and I'm 31 years old. Even now, I can remember the exact sound of my parents laughing. Not the warm, comforting laughter that makes a house feel like home, but the cold, cutting kind that stays with you long after the moment has passed. It was the kind of laughter that sliced through my confidence and left scars no one else could see. It happened during a family picnic on a Sunday afternoon in late July, surrounded by paper plates, bowls of potato salad, and the polished smiles my family had always perfected whenever outsiders were watching. My older sister, Clarissa, lifted her glass with the theatrical flourish she always seemed to have, as though every family gathering was another chance to perform. She smiled, looked around the table, and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Here's to the one who always shows up broke, needy, and still hoping to matter." The words hung in the air for only a second before my parents burst into laughter. My father's shoulders shook as he laughed openly. My mother covered her mouth, pretending to hide her amusement, though she made no real effort to do so. Around the table, my cousins suddenly became quiet. One of my aunts stared down at her plate, avoiding eye contact with anyone. I simply sat there, gripping my glass of iced tea while I felt every drop of blood drain from my face. What nobody sitting at that table realized, or perhaps what Clarissa conveniently chose to forget, was that the woman she had just mocked in front of everyone was also the same sister who had quietly loaned her more than $127,000 over the previous 4 years. Not a single dollar had ever been repaid. Not one genuine thank you. Not even an honest acknowledgement that the debt still existed. To understand how everything reached that moment, you have to go back much further. The story didn't truly begin at that picnic. It started 6 years earlier, when I was 25 years old and had finally secured a respectable job in financial consulting after surviving 2 years of unpaid internships and carrying a mountain of student loans. I wasn't wealthy. In fact, I wasn't even financially comfortable. But I was disciplined. Every paycheck followed a strict budget that I guarded with the same care most people reserve for their deepest secrets. Clarissa, who is 3 years older than me, was going through what my mother always referred to as a difficult phase. That description sounded gentle, almost harmless. The reality was far more complicated. Her small business had collapsed, her marriage had ended in divorce, she was fighting an expensive custody battle that required constant legal fees, and despite everything, she refused to make any meaningful changes to the lifestyle she had become accustomed to. One evening she called me crying. Not ordinary tears, but the kind of desperate sobbing that reaches through the phone and tightens your chest before you've even heard the full story. She told me she was about to lose her apartment. She said my niece, Rosalie, would have nowhere to sleep. The following morning I transferred $8,000 into her account without asking for a contract, a repayment schedule, or any written agreement. She was my sister. Helping her felt like the obvious thing to do. At least, that's what I believed then. The truth is, that's what I did the first time. Then I did it again. And again. Before long, it stopped feeling like an exception and quietly became our normal. The requests became so frequent that Clarissa eventually stopped pretending each one was temporary. The phone calls evolved over time. At first there were emergencies, rent, lawyer fees, overdue bills. Later they became opportunities. A promising business venture. A newer car she supposedly needed for work. A security deposit on a larger apartment in a better neighborhood so Rosalie could attend a stronger school. More often than not, I said yes. Every time I hesitated, Clarissa found the same argument that never failed to work. She mentioned Rosalie. My niece had absolutely nothing to do with the financial chaos surrounding her mother, and I loved that little girl with all my heart. Clarissa understood exactly how much Rosalie meant to me, and she used that love as leverage every single time. She knew which emotional button to press, and I kept responding exactly as she expected. Looking back now, I realized something that seemed insignificant at the time eventually became the most important decision I ever made. I kept records. Every bank transfer confirmation. Every payment receipt. Every screenshot of our conversations. Every message where Clarissa acknowledged receiving the money. Everything. On my laptop, I created a folder simply called Family, followed by a small lock emoji. At the time, I thought I was just staying organized. Looking back, that folder feels both heartbreaking and strangely appropriate. Inside it sat a spreadsheet that grew larger month after month. Dates. Amounts. Reasons for each transfer. Notes about what the money was supposedly for. And every acknowledgement Clarissa ever sent. The final total eventually reached $127,420. That extra $420 always stands out in my mind because it came from an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when she texted me saying she needed groceries. I didn't ask any questions. I simply sent the money. Now, back to that family picnic. After Clarissa finished her insulting toast and my parents laughed along with her, the awkward silence slowly settled over the table. Everyone seemed eager to pretend the moment had already passed. I calmly lifted my own glass. Oddly enough, my hand wasn't shaking, even though my heart felt like it was pounding hard enough to break through my chest. I looked directly at Clarissa. Not at my parents. Not at my cousins. Only at her. I smiled politely and said, "Here's to the desperate one." Then I stopped. I slowly placed my glass back on the table. Instead of continuing, I reached for my phone. I opened the folder. Tapped on the spreadsheet. Without saying another word, I slid my phone across the table toward my mother, who was sitting closest to me. In a calm voice that barely rose above a whisper, I said, "I think you should read this before you keep laughing." My mother picked up the phone cautiously, almost as though she expected it to contain something dangerous. She stared at the screen. At first, nothing about her expression changed. For several seconds she simply read. Then I watched the realization spread across her face. It happened gradually, taking perhaps 4 or 5 seconds, the exact amount of time it takes for the mind to process something it never imagined could be true. The color slowly disappeared from her face. Without saying a single word, she handed the phone to my father. Across the table, Clarissa had become perfectly still. She already knew what was displayed on that screen. She had always known. My father studied the spreadsheet in complete silence. His eyes moved from line to line, following every date, every amount, every transfer. Then he looked up at me. Next, he looked at Clarissa. The backyard had become so quiet that I could hear the gentle sound of our neighbor's wind chimes drifting over from 2 houses away. Nearby, 7-year-old Rosalie looked up from the children's table and cheerfully asked if anyone wanted to come play with her. No one answered. She simply shrugged, returned to her coloring book, completely unaware that the adults' table had just become the center of a truth that could no longer remain hidden. Clarissa opened her mouth. Closed it again. Then tried once more. Finally, she managed to say, those weren't loans. I met her eyes without raising my voice. "Read the messages," I said quietly. "You called them loans every single time." And just like that, an even heavier silence settled over the table.